Welcome to the Egg Whisperer Show, a program exclusively designed to promote reproductive health awareness and discuss fertility preservation options. Here is your host, the Harvard-educated fertility specialist, Dr. Amy.
She's known as the Egg Whisperer.
Fertility expert Dr. Amy Abazadeh.
And you have yet another success story
Just launched by an East Bay fertility doctor.
Hi everyone, thank you for joining me tonight on another episode of the Egg Whisperer Show. Tonight's episode is titled, How to Create Your Own Personalized IVF Plan. So if you know a little bit about me, you know that I'm all about personalized fertility care, diagnosis before treatment. That is the Egg Whisperer way. And I want everyone to learn these simple steps that they can take. I mean, think about it. When you go on a trip, what are you going to do? You're going to go into Google Maps, and then maybe you'll switch over to Waze, for those of you who don't know that app. If there's an accident or some sort of car broken down, well, they're going to redirect you to a different route. Well, how about this? Think about fertility in the same way. Before you start off on the fertility journey, and I don't like journeys. As much as possible, I like them to be paths. So I like paths to pregnancy. So sit down, talk to your doctor, ask questions, and figure out the best path to pregnancy for you. And so if you're doing IVF, I'm going to teach you all these steps. I'm not trying to just be cute like this cute little mouse. Hello, little mousey. Very cute mouse. I want to be practical because I want everyone to decrease the steps that they take toward the goal, which is a baby. Decrease the number of treatments that are not successful, and increase time to pregnancy. So that's what I'm trying to do, to teach everyone my methods of how to create a personalized IVF care plan for you. So it starts with diagnosis, and there are no two people that are alike. You can't compare what happens at your egg retrieval with your friend's egg retrieval, even if you're the same age. Just like you can't compare your fertility with your mom's fertility. So the steps are figuring out, as you guys have all heard me say, the parts of your tushy, and I'm serious. This is not a joke. I'll talk a little bit more about those parts in a second, but figuring out the diagnostic test, the carrier screening test, the plan, and the expectations, because there are some patients who don't want all their eggs fertilized. There are some patients who only want one child. There are some patients who don't want high-dose medications and injectable medications. So you have to tell your doctor those things. Tell them exactly how you feel, what you're worried about before you start. So the Tishy Method, or the Tishy mnemonic, stands for tubes, uterus, sperms, hormones, and your genetic profile. Every Tuesday I do some tushy talk. I really don't. But I use Tuesdays to remind people on social media that there are simple steps that you can take to understand more about your fertility. And if you're going through IVF, you want to know why you're doing IVF. You want to know what you can do to give yourself the highest chance of pregnancy at home, so that when you're going through the IVF process, you're giving yourself the very best chance. And I have patients say, oh, I've already done all that tushy stuff. I've already done it. And everyone says, oh, everything's fine. Well, I can tell you that chances are you might have not done everything. So we'll talk a little bit more about all the elements in a moment. So now, diagnosis. Understand it. And if you don't understand the diagnosis, if you're not getting the answer as to why you're doing IVF, ask again. And if you're still not getting the answer, go to someone else. Get a second opinion, third opinion. It's so important. It's so empowering to know why you're doing IVF in the first place. Simply going through, let's say, 6 or 7 IUI cycles and not having it work, and then going to IVF, I have patients that say, well, no one knows why they didn't work. Well, that tells me, well, either there was a fertilization issue that was sperm-driven or egg-driven. So there are certain tests that I'm going to do before IVF, like checking DNA fragmentation and making sure a reproductive genetic profile was done, especially on the egg source, so that going into your IVF cycle, you're not going to be surprised with things like no fertilization or a low fertilization rate, let's say, if you don't choose the process of ICSI. So these are the kinds of things that we talk about. And I also talk about things like being as fit as possible. And there are folks on Instagram that I show patients, I say, look at this person. Use them as your cheerleader on your cheerleading squad. Some of the tips that I give patients are have a dessert only on birthdays. Don't go for seconds. So every day can be someone's birthday. I know, that is true. But in general, I want people to avoid sweets and carbs and eat healthy, nutritious meals that basically are going to be fertility promoting, and being active is super important. I know there's this sense when you're trying to get pregnant, all of a sudden you don't want to move because heavens forbid you adjust something and something goes out of place. And I find patients that just want to sit still in between their ovulation and their pregnancy test. But this is the time to be active and maintain a healthy BMI. So a healthy BMI is between 19 and 24 to 26. So talk to your doctor about what your goal BMI should be based on what they know about you. And certainly it's not just about BMI for the egg source. And I use that term egg source and sperm source because I know that not every family is a mommy-daddy family. So when you have, let's say, 2 egg sources, sometimes these topics aren't necessarily applicable, and I'm very sensitive to that as well. So when we talk about a mommy-daddy family, for example, and we're talking about the sperm source, we know that every embryo requires an egg cell and a sperm cell, and things have changed. We used to say if you put anything into an egg, it's going to be all up to the egg as to whether it's going to turn into a healthy embryo. No, not so much. Sperm health does matter, and we're learning more and more about preconception health for men and how that impacts embryo quality. So I don't know if you've heard me talk about trimester 0. So that's the skydiving class that everyone should be taking before they jump out of the plane. I hope that analogy makes sense. Because for sure, when you're going to go skydiving, you're going to sit through a course and find out what are the things that you should do. Well, the same thing is true for men. As women, we all know that we should be taking prenatals. Men should be doing the same thing too, especially before an IVF cycle. And the other thing that I talk about is trying to avoid the typical pizza and beer diet. For sure, we know that lifestyle factors do impact sperm health, testosterone levels, and the quality in general. So if you're going to put yourself through all those shots, make sure that you're also thinking about the sperm health as well before you go through such an invasive process that is called IVF. So the why in the Tishy method is your genetic profile. And I find people say, oh, I've done it. I know all my genetics. And what I find is they actually haven't done a complete genetic profile, and that includes reproductive genes. Wouldn't you want to know if you're at risk for having endometriosis, PCOS, early menopause? You know, if you carry some of those genes, sometimes that means that your egg quality may not be as good when you go through IVF. And what about extended carrier screening? Wouldn't you want to know that you're not just compatible with your partner, but you're also genetically compatible? So think of these tests as sort of a crystal ball. They're the closest thing in IVF medicine that we have to a crystal ball. I wish that we can test an embryo and look at all the genes. And I find that people misunderstand what genetic screening actually means when it comes to screening an embryo. So for now, when you look at an embryo, you can just look at the chromosomes. Think of it as like a full set of Harry Potter books. Well, you can't tell if a page is missing or bent, and that's what carrier screening does. It tells us if there's a missing page that might be bent, and then you can then find that page before you go through your IVF cycle, so you can figure out in each embryo if that page is missing before you transfer. I like surprises. I like surprises when a patient tells me, Amy, I don't have to do IVF with you because I got pregnant without your help. Like, that's amazing. I don't like surprises when people tell me, and I hope that this won't happen, when patients tell me, Amy, I have a baby with a disorder, and there was a test that you could have done, like carrier screening, and you know, I could have been spared the heartache of dealing with something as tragic as that. So let's talk through doing these tests before you go through your IVF cycle and not finding out you're a carrier disease or your partner is also a carrier disease when you're pregnant. So we want to have no mama drama as much as possible. Again, I know it's part of the human condition, but think of me as, I guess, fertility Google Maps or fertility Amy Maps or the Alexa of fertility. I want the path to be as smooth as possible for everybody. So the next step is using a protocol that's designed for you. So once you've done all these tests, that's exactly what your doctor is going to do. So talk to them, ask questions, ask them why they're doing what they're doing. Why are they using birth control pills? Would it be better off for you if you don't use birth control pills? What medications are they going to put you on? Why or why not? How many mature eggs do they expect from your cycle? And ask those questions along the way. And also talk through how many kids do you want in your family? What's your desired family size? Because if you're doing a cycle, let's say at 31, and you get one healthy embryo, well, if you wait 2 years, chances are it might be even harder to get that even one healthy embryo. So you may want to preserve your fertility and not have fertility regret. You hear people talking about freezing eggs all the time. Well, if you know a little bit about me, I have eggfreezingparty.com. And I use that as a platform to teach people about fertility screening. In fact, I'm going to make bumper stickers that say, get your fertility levels checked. I'll be driving all around town reminding people. But we don't do enough to guide families who are struggling to get pregnant to also think about preserving their fertility when they're younger. So talk to your doctor before you transfer and ask, how many cycles should I do? That's super important. And then before your transfer, review your embryology report with your doctor. And if your doctor isn't as available as you'd want them to be, call the lab, talk to the embryologist. What I find is patients are told, oh, your embryos are normal. And then I ask questions because I get people that reach out to me from all over the world. And I ask them questions like, well, what's the quality of your embryo? And the patients say, well, I wasn't told that. And I'll ask questions like, well, did the genetic testing company, were they able to tell you if there were any mosaic embryos or not? Did you work with a company that could tell you that? Did you work with a company that gives you the mitochondrial DNA score? So these are things that you want to ask up front, because if you have an option to maybe use a genetic testing company that gives you this information, and maybe if you don't, you would want to know that before you started the process. So think of embryos as diamonds, right? So diamonds have, I don't have diamonds. I buy them all. I buy crystals from Swarovski. I love them. They're very pretty. But I know that there's like cut, clarity, color, carat, like those are that's how we describe diamonds. Well, embryos are the same thing. They have those scores that go along with them. And the scores kind of define, like a diamond, how valuable that embryo is. And in embryo language, what that means is how likely that embryo is going to stick. So for example, if you have a 10% embryo and an 85% embryo and you want 2 kids, well, you might want to do another cycle so you can get another 85% embryo in the future. And so that's why I always ask my patients before I transfer, remind me, and I always write it down, but I like to talk about these things. What is your ideal family size? There are people out there who are as nuts as I am who want 4 kids. Yes, I do have 4, but there are some people that are very happy with 1 or 2. Or they say to me 2 or 3. And when I tell people who say they just want 1 or they'd be so happy with even 1, I say, you know what? Things might change. Like, you don't know how transformative being a parent will be. So give yourself an option to have more than 1 in the future if that option exists for you. And the next step is also creating a welcoming home for the embryos. I think of having that house guest as the most important house guest of your life for 9 months. And so when you know that someone extremely important is going to be staying with you, what do? Don't you clean the house and make sure that everything is beautiful, the sheets are clean? Same thing. You want to spend the same amount of energy as you would preparing your house for the most important house guest of your life as you would on your uterus. So take the steps that you need to do. Things like reduce stress. I talk to patients about how to create a mind-body center for yourself. So you may not have a mind-body center in the city that you live in that can help you with fertility issues, but you can create your own by finding an acupuncturist that you trust, a fertility therapist, maybe a place that does salt floats, a massage, something like Massage Envy. I mean, there are a number of ways that you can support yourself and reduce stress before you do your embryo transfer. And as always, ask questions. And if you feel like you're not getting the answers, go with your gut. Ask more. It's as simple as that. I mean, I get mad with patients when they don't ask me. And they say, I'm so sorry I bothered you. And I honestly say, I would only be bothered if you actually didn't ask me this question. So I welcome all questions because at the end of the day, MD does not mean medical deity. We're simply human beings, as fertility doctors, who are trying to help something that's so common basically in the human condition. So having miscarriages is common. Having fertility issues is common. So I want people to know the important questions that they can ask, especially before their transfer. And when it comes to the uterus, we ask things like, how thick is the lining of my uterus? What is the texture? Is there any inflammation? How many hours of progesterone does my body need for implantation to occur? So these are kinds of things that I talk to patients about. And so there are tests that you can do on the lining of the uterus before you even transfer. Sometimes I don't do the test. It kind of depends on what the patient's story is. And a lot of times I do them, but I always want to talk to people about what I would recommend if, let's say, a transfer didn't work. And then they would have the option of saying, you know what, I think this test makes sense for me. My gut is this might have been an issue the entire time. So those are the things that I want people to know. So you now have my step-by-step guide for how to design your personalized IVF care plan. I want this guide to be helpful for you, and I hope that by watching this show and reading my articles that I've helped at least one person out there decrease the pain and trouble that we know that fertility problems can cause. Thank you guys for watching tonight. And if you need me, you know where to find me on eggwhisperer.com. Good night.
Welcome to the Egg Whisperer Show, a program exclusively designed to promote reproductive health awareness and discuss fertility preservation options. Here is your host, the Harvard-educated fertility specialist, Dr. Amy.
She's known as the Egg Whisperer.
Fertility expert Dr. Amy Abazadeh.
And you have yet another success story.
Just launched by an East Bay fertility doctor.
Welcome to the Egg Whisperer Show, a program exclusively designed to promote reproductive health awareness